In an effort to protect those at greatest risk, our initial vaccine rollout prioritized these individuals, the everyday heroes of our society. Our healthcare systems are once again at maximum capacity in parts of the country. Our teachers are facing uncertainty as they walk into the classroom, and I must do what I can to preserve the health across our nation. I'm also aware of the disproportionate impact this pandemic has had on racial and ethnic minority communities. Many of our frontline workers, essential workers, and those in congregate settings come from communities that have already been hardest hit. Withholding access for boosters from these people and communities would only worsen the inequities that I have committed to fight against. It was a decision about providing rather than withholding access. I too thought of the stressors of the current moment of this pandemic and the principles of access and equity in my decision. I want to be very clear that I did not overrule an advisory committee. This was I listened to all of the proceedings of the FDA advisory committee and intently listened to this exceptional group of scientists that publicly and very transparently deliberated for hours over some of these very difficult questions and where the science was. After those deliberations, I listened to the votes, I listened to the comments on the votes, and this was a scientific close call. And I think you could tell by the duration of the meeting and the discussions that this was a scientific close call. In that situation, it was my call to make. At the conclusion of the meeting, the advisory committee had a robust discussion about whether boosters should be available for those at high risk of COVID because of occupational or institutional risk. People like healthcare workers, teachers, frontline responders, essential workers, and those in congregate settings. The result of their discussion was a close vote. Had I been in the room and on the committee, I would have voted yes. And that is reflected in my resulting decision to allow the use of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 booster dose for those 18 and older at high risk of COVID-19 exposure and transmission because of occupational and institutional exposure. As CDC director, it's my job to recognize where our actions can have the greatest impact. In a pandemic, we most often take steps with the intention to do the greatest good, even in an uncertain environment. And that is what I'm doing with these recommendations. The interim guidance is for Pfizer booster vaccines for COVID-19. It is a first step, and we will continue to review new data on effectiveness and experience with the third shot as it becomes available.
Starting today, if you are 6 months out from your last dose of the Pfizer vaccine, you are eligible for a booster if you fall into one of 3 high-risk groups. Number 1, you are 65 or older. Number 2, you have a medical condition that puts you at high risk of severe illness with COVID. And these conditions include obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, and others. And number 3, you work or live in a setting where you're at increased risk of exposure to COVID. This includes healthcare workers, teachers, those living in shelters or prisons, and grocery store workers. Now, the CDC and FDA recommendations apply to Pfizer vaccine recipients, and I want to speak directly to those who receive Moderna and J&J. Your health matters just as much as other vaccine recipients, and we want to make sure that your protection against COVID is strong and reliable as well. That's why the FDA is working closely with Moderna and J&J to get and process their data as quickly as possible, with the goal of making booster recommendations for Moderna and J&J recipients in the coming weeks. This is a high priority.
And based on the FDA and CDC's decision, over 60 million Americans who are fully vaccinated with Pfizer will now be eligible for a booster once they hit their 6-month mark. Up to 20 million Americans have already hit their 6-month mark and therefore are now eligible. So as of today, up to 20 million Americans can get their booster shot. We are ready to get booster shots in arms right away.
What about severe disease? Here again, in a study from Israel, in individuals age 60 or older in a per 100,000 population. On the left part of the slide, unvaccinated in red, those who have 2 doses of the mRNA, 37, compared to those who got 2 doses plus the booster, down to 4. This is more dramatically demonstrated on the right-hand side of the slide when you look at the months of infection with severe disease, 175 unvaccinated, 37 of the people who got 2 doses, and 4 with those who got the 3rd boost.
We'll be getting booster shots as early as this afternoon. Dr. Walensky?